application, we type in something, and we save our search. All right? And that's what we would want to have happen, right? We'd want to have those buttons appear saying that they have successfully saved it. So that's one use case. And I could do it over and over again. Some sort of side use cases relate to what if someone does one of those use cases but something goes wrong. For example, if I tried to enter in a second search that was tagged Android, like Android games instead of Android development, and I tried to save it as Android, what would happen? That would be a use case. All right? So all your error conditions also become use cases. One thing that I've noticed, and again, I'm going a little bit off on a tangent. I don't know if it's because it's Monday morning or because seeing the screen pop up in French a minute ago threw me for a loop or what. But I think it's important to talk about systematically testing your application. All right? We talked a lot about programming in this class and how to program it and what to do and all that. One thing that I try to talk about at least some, but it's a little harder to talk about, is testing your application. You know, the programming in the middle is important, but just as important is the stuff that happens before and the stuff that happens after. The design of the application. Figure out what you're going to do, how you're going to do it. More importantly than that, maybe even, or maybe even before that, is what you need to do. All right? What does the user need this application? What are the goals? What is this application trying to serve? So figuring that out and figuring out the use cases that your application needs to be able to handle and how it should handle it. That's very important. Then you program it. Then testing it to make sure that it does what it's supposed to do and it's usable and so on and so forth. It's important that you're systematic in all those things, right? You don't want to just sit down at the keyboard and start hacking away at stuff, all right? You want to have a plan for what you're going to do, you want to do it, and then you want to have a plan for testing it. So that's where this whole use case thing becomes in very handy, because the use cases that you use to figure out what you're going to do, all right, actually become your test cases, where you say, all right, I was going to be able to type in a query, click save, and the buttons were supposed to appear. Did that actually happen? And I can then run the test case and see, yep, it did. No, it didn't. All right, so that would be one use case. A second use case would be that I actually go and do a Twitter search. All right. A third use case would be that I click edit. My mistake. When you click edit, I thought a box popped up. When you click edit, it simply pops up here. All right, so my mistake. And I can go in and edit if I want to and save it. All right. Clear tags is a third or fourth test case. And then there'd be all the test cases for error conditions. Like, for example, I go in and try to save something that I've already saved a Twitter search for. All right. Or I leave everything blank and try to save it. All right? So we're going to follow through all these different use cases to make sure that we understand the code. A fifth test case is what happens when we bring up the application initially and it loads all the searches that we have searched before. All right? The persistence of it. The first search case we're going to talk about is if I open the application, there's nothing, for the first time, there's nothing there, and I go in and add a new Twitter search. So we're going to work on this test case where there's nothing there. We enter in our search terms, click save, and it adds it to the list. All right, that's the first one we're going to do. So let's look at that. Here we have our activity. We have our imports. Again, we import the things, the classes that we're going to use so that we don't have to fully qualify them. We can just put in the class name. Here is our activity. We have 4 instance variables in this activity. We have a shared preferences class, which is a new class that we haven't seen. This is a simple way to give some persistence between instances of an application. So this is what allows it to remember the searches that we've entered even after the application is shut down. We then are going to have a table layout. We're going to have then 2 edit texts for the query and the tag. All right. We start the application. We call our superclasses create method. We set the content view. And remember, what does the set content view do? All right? We're setting the content view to our layout main. So what that does is that takes that XML file and again, it brings it to life. It inflates it. It hydrates it. All right? It reconstitutes it. So this layout describes all the objects that we're going to have on the activity's main view. This statement here is what says bring that to life. So now what we have is we have our screen with all these objects on. All right? Now, this application doesn't know about any of those specific objects yet. It will, but right now it doesn't know about them. All it knows is that this view, its application's view, consists of this screen that came to life from the objects that are in this file. All right? So again, that's going to be very standard. It's going to be in all your programs. Again, that's what creates the UI screen associated with this activity. All right, here's stuff that we're using to when the application fires up a second time and it remembers it. We're going to skip that for now. All right, query table layout. That's this guy, this instance variable. Equals find view by ID. All right. In other words, look in the view. Find in the view that has an ID of query table layout. All right. And that will be not the main table, but this inner table. So what this is getting a pointer to, all right, when it says find view by ID query table layout, is it's finding a pointer and it's pointing to this table here, the inner table, not the main table. All right. Again, we spent a good amount of time last time and previous times talking about what a line like this means. So it's important that you understand it. So if you don't understand it yet, let me know. We can go over it in lab again. All right. But effectively what this does is this is getting a pointer to one of the things on the view. Why do we need to get a pointer? Because we need to do something with it. Right? What do we need to do? Well, in this case, we need to add rows to that table. So we can't add rows to the table if we can't point to the table. All right? So now this instance variable, and it's an instance variable then because it can be used then anywhere within this class. All right? That's why we define things as an instance variable, because we know that we're likely to need them everywhere through the class. All right. We do the same thing for those text boxes. We set our two instance variables for the search and for the tag associated with this. So now we have three of our instance variables set. We're pointing to that table that's going to be expanding. We're pointing to the query edit text box, the tag edit text box. Now we're pointing to the button. All right? And that is the save button right here. Now, notice that they don't use an instance variable for this, right? In other words, there isn't up here in the list of attributes for this class, there is no instance variable for the button. Instead, they simply create a local variable for save button. The reason for that is because nowhere else in the application, nowhere else in this view class, do we need to reference that button. What are we going to do with that button? We're going to point to it, and then we're going to associate a listener with it. What's a listener again? It's code that sits and waits for some event to happen. And when that event happens, it goes and it does its thing. That's really the only thing we need the button for. We don't need to remember the button in a bunch of different places. We don't need to point to that button in a bunch of different places in this app. We only need the button so that we can hook the listener to it, so that we can associate our code with it. So these things, these three things, we made instance variables for because we're going to be using those throughout the view. This button, we're only going to be using it here, and that is we're going to tie our little snippet of code, our listener, to this button. And then we never need to point to that button again. So therefore, we don't have it as an instance variable. Could you do it as an instance variable? Yes, you could. Would it be wrong to do it? Not really. This is slightly more efficient because, again, it only holds that reference as long as it needs to. We're not keeping that reference, so it'd be slightly less memory this app would take up. So what are we doing? We find that button, save it in a local variable called save button. We then set that button's on-click listener to the save button listener. We then do the same thing with the clear button. So these two buttons, we're setting the two listeners for. And we've made two separate classes for this. Two separate inner classes, classes that are defined inside this main class. Those two different classes are set on click save button listener and clear button listener. Then we call refresh buttons, and we're going to ignore that for now. All right, remember what's the use case that we're speaking of now? The use case we're speaking of now is when someone goes in, fires up the application, enters in a search query term and a tag, and we click save. So we're going to ignore this clear button for now, and then we're going to look at the save button. All right. So what happens when the save button is clicked? Well, as we know, we've defined for that button a listener called save button listener. So when that button is clicked, the on-click function method on this save button listener is going to fire up. All right, let's go and find the save button listener. Did I scroll past it? I must have, yeah. There we go. I do not have the best eyesight in the world, and looking at this is kind of like driving Saturday night. If any of you were out Saturday night, you know, can't really see much in front of me. All right, so this is the on-click listener. All right. So we're defining a public on-click listener called Save Button Listener, which is a new on-click listener, and then we're putting in here all the code associated with this. All right? This is sometimes what's called an anonymous class, because there's no real class name here. All right? We're creating a instance variable called SaveButtonListener that is a new one of these, and we're filling in all of these. But there's really no class name associated with it. But there is an on-click view, or an on-click method, which is looking at the view, all right, and doing something with it. So what happens when we click it? Well, first of all, it checks the length of the two fields and make sure that they are greater than 0. All right. In other words, make sure that we've entered something in both of the two text fields, both the query and the tag. We're going to assume for now that we have, right? That's one nice thing about these cases is for each individual case, you try to make it simple. Then you can go in and you can make several cases. Like another case could be, what if someone tries to save something and they forgot the query, and so on. So we'll look at that one second. That's sort of a sub-case here. Here, if they've entered something in both for the query and for the tag, we call a method called MakeTag, cleverly enough. All right. And what do we pass it? We pass it the two arguments, the name of the query, or the string for the query, and the string for the tag name. All right. These, if you recall, are the instance variables that we define for this class, that we got our pointers to in the onCreate method. Now notice that there's not a lot of code here, right? We're following, again, the idea, the philosophy that our event handlers really don't do much. They simply are sort of the glue that hooks our GUI to the functions that actually do the processing. All right? So there's not a lot of code in here. We have an if statement that looks to make sure that everything was entered correctly. If it was, we save the tag. And there's only like 4 lines of code, and they're all real simple. If we have not entered everything correctly, we then tell the user. But the actual real processing takes place in this MakeTag function. All right? So the first thing we do is we call that MakeTag function, and we pass it the value of the query, and we pass it the value of the tag. We're going to forget about this for a while. We're going to come back to this in a second. All right? Because these last 3 lines are really, really simple. So we're going to just fly through them, and then we'll spend some time looking at that MakeTag function. Query edit text, set text blank. What are we doing? After we've entered in a tag, we blank it out. Makes sense, right? We do the same thing for the tag. So after I've successfully entered something in to both of these, and I click save, it clears out that tag. By the way, one thing I don't think I pointed out is notice how it says enter Twitter search query value and enter a tag name. But it's not really a value in there. You can see it's a little bit faded. All right, it's not the full strength of font like when I enter something in. That comes from our layout file and is the hint attribute. And the hint attribute points to, of course, a string file, because we're not going to hard code anything. And that string file says query prompt enter Twitter searches query here. All right. One thing I would hope is at this point of the class, you have a pretty good idea like where things are. So if I were to ask you to change that to say, I don't want it to say tag your query, I want it to say enter tag, you should be able to know like where to go to do that. All right, okay, that's associated with the GUI, so it's in the XML. In the XML, we don't have anything hard coded, so there must be a string value for it, and that's where it is. The last thing we do with this is a lovely long instruction that I couldn't duplicate if my life depended on it. Fortunately, it's one of those things that you get down once and then you copy and paste it in everything that you do from here on in. And what this does is this gets rid of the soft keyboard. All right. Most Android devices with a touch screen, all right, don't have an actual physical keyboard. They have a software keyboard, and that's called the soft keyboard. All right, in other words, it appears on the screen. It's not an actual physical keyboard. So when I go and click save, notice that the keyboard disappears. All right, this is a line of code that's responsible for it. All right. So we kind of went over what this does. We call the MakeTag function, which makes a tag. All right. We then clear out those two text boxes, and we hide the keyboard. Well, this function, though, we need to look at in more detail. So we'll start doing that. I'll see how far we get, and then we'll go from there. All right, MakeTag. The MakeTag function contains two arguments: the query itself and the tag that we want to have. So we can go in and go to our MakeTag function. This function, first of all, grabs everything that we've saved before. All right. It then takes the new tag and adds it to our shared preferences class, which is, again, remember, we're storing all our saved queries in that shared preferences class or object. So this goes and adds the new query that we're saving to that list. We then call refresh buttons and pass it the tag. All right. In other words, when we save a tag, we're doing two things. Number one, we're putting it on the list of saved tags. All right, which is accomplished via that shared preference list. So that's one thing that we do. So that next time when we bring this up, it'll remember that, yeah, we search for Android development. The second thing that we're doing with this is, if it's a brand new tag, we're going to add our buttons to it. All right? And we call the refresh buttons function, and we pass it the tag. Let's look at the refresh buttons method. Okay. We're grabbing all of the tags that were there previously. We're sorting them. This particular use case, we're assuming there are no tags previously, so we'll not look at those right now. We're then checking to see if new tag is not null. If new tag is not null, that means that there is a new tag. In other words, we're going in and we're creating these buttons for a brand new tag. So, we call MakeTag GUI, and we pass it the new tag, and we pass it the place where this fits in to the list of tags. All right? I have a series of tags in here. I have Android, and then I have two nonsense ones. That one starts with U, one starts with Y. So let me go in and I'm going to put in as a tag Mike. And I click Save. It's going to put it between Android and the one that starts with U. All right, there it is. So how does it do that? How does it know to put the button? That's what this is doing right here. We grab all the things that were in our list of saved tags previously, and we sort them. We then go and look and see, hey, we have a new tag. We need to know where to put it. All right? So, how do we know where to put it? Well, we're going to put that new tag in whatever position this function tells us to put it in. So what this function does is it takes the array of tags that we've already saved and does a binary search and tells us, does it belong in position 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or so on down the line. And then we're going to insert the tag in that position, in that table row of the table. Now in this case it's easy, because remember this use case, we're assuming we're starting out with nothing. So that value is going to be 0, that binary search, because there's nothing in the saved tags array yet. So again, when we run through the other test case where there's stuff already there, then there'll be a value for that. So now we're going to call MakeTag GUI, and we're going to pass it the new tag, and we're going to pass it the position that it belongs in there.